Hi everyone, welcome back to the workshop, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different and kind of dial it back a little bit. There's been a lot of lasers coming out this past year in the 20, 30, 40, now even rumored to maybe have some 50 watt diode lasers coming out possibly by the end of the year. And so the question is there room anymore for a 5 and 10 watt laser? Should someone even look at them getting into the hobby, or would there be a reason to pick one up for yourself even if you have maybe a higher watt laser? So Atomstack did reach out to me and asked if I wanted to take a look at their X7 Pro combo that comes with the R1 Rotary. So I said, hey, why not? This would be a good time to answer that very question. And is there a reason to look at 10 watt lasers anymore? So if that's something that interests you, stay tuned. We're going to jump right into it. All right, so we did get this one assembled, and there were really no surprises in the assembly. Went together like your typical Atomstack frame. These are built fairly well. They self-align, and the extrusions tend to be threaded well when the bolts go right in. We've assembled a few of these before, and it was pretty much the same. I did notice a couple things. Cable management, of course, is typical. It's the kind of the wire loom surrounding all the cables, and they do a decent job, but these did seem like they're very tight towards the ends. Like when I move these over, that's fairly tight, and this one's there's not a lot of slack on there. There's possibly maybe a little bit of wiggle room there, but as always with these open frame lasers, that's kind of my common complaint, is just cable management is minimal, and in this case it's almost too tight. But take your time, work it together, get your anchor points down. I did not have any problems in running this laser, and it is fine. But as always, would love to see someone come up with maybe slightly better cable management on these. It does have the limit switches on the 2 axes, so you can home it, and that works great. The focus knob is a nice big knob right in the middle here in front, so you could literally focus one hand, which is really a nice thing. There's a lot of these lasers where maybe it's in the back and you got to grab things around. It's definitely a two-handed operation. Still recommend using 2 hands, but the fact that I can kind of grab the module and loosen and tighten this with one hand is just a bonus and benefit. I do like how they do that on all their Atomstack modules. Now this one did not come with glasses, so I would definitely recommend you get some. I have a link down to a good set down below that you should use with any diode laser. But if this was removable, then you could see kind of that cone better. You could see that point. And we'll get into this a little bit later with the rotary, but by having that there now on the side, they do kind of have this center point for the laser to help you line things up. But without being able to see that very well, it does make it a little more tricky to get your alignment just spot on. So I would love to see this have kind of more of a replaceable shroud. Another thing that I think is a real miss on here is there's no default air assist. I think there is an add-on module for this, and I'm not sure how that fits in with this not really being removable. From what I saw online, it might be about $100, which gives you like a different bottom piece and then the air assist cone and such. But this day and age, having an air assist is, I think, critical to being able to cut with your lasers. I know that would drive up the cost, and they're trying to make this a budget laser. So it would just really been nice to see that they maybe had the cone there and you could add on your own pump or maybe do that. So I feel that is a miss if you're looking at doing much cutting with this, as well as even having some positive airflow just to keep the smoke out during engraving. It does have this offline controller up front. It connects to these HDMI ports. We've looked at these in the past. They're okay. You load your files onto the micro SD card and then you bring it up in here. It's really limiting, and I tend to just ignore these and run through the software connected with the laptop. And one of my favorite features on any CNC device, be it a laser, CNC router, a plasma cutter, is this emergency stop button. I like that Atomstack includes it. It's big, it's there, it works well, and this will kill power to the controller, the laser, the motion. If you're having a problem, being able to shut down your machine is great. So I love the fact that they have the e-stop button. Your other buttons are up here on top. You got your power button, your USB, and your power cord, and then a reset button. I really wish these 2 cables for power and USB were maybe on the side to get those out of the way of everything up here. It's not terrible. I've seen it on most of the other Atomstack devices, but I really would love just to see those off to the side of the module coming out here instead of sticking up. It just kind of gets in the way of hitting your e-stop button and then maybe your power and reset. Again, it's not the end of the world. You can work around them, but if you're having an issue and you want to hit that button, you don't want to be fumbling through cables and such. But overall, this does work well, and didn't have any problems with it. Just a couple things that I would love to see in the future. So other than that, you know, a typical Atomstack frame works very well as far as its function. The belt tension is easy to adjust. The eccentric nuts are easy to get at. So your basic operations of the laser are all there and easy to work with. You know, you'll need to do some minor cleaning on here, mostly just wiping down. Just maybe get a wet alcohol wipe or even just some Windex on there. Make sure you have keep the dust and debris off of here, and then also clean your cover lens as well in there. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to operating this laser. It's pretty basic, pretty straightforward, and in that realm is pretty easy to get going with. All right, so they do also include the R1 Rotary, and this is a chuck style rotary. I've done a full review on this earlier, so I will link that down below or maybe up in the corner. And this is one thing I really like about this package. This type of rotary, I think, is really good to have. It works well on so many different ways. You can do straight items, but if you have tapered items, one of the nice things about this is you can loosen this up and you can just put this whole thing at an angle so that your taper is more level with your laser. And then it does grab onto the outside of the items. So they do have a few different types of chuck accessories. They have these shorter feet that can go in either direction. So if you need to grab the outside of a thinner item, you can flip these around, have them towards the inside, and they will grab things like small dowels, pencils, pens, and such. They also have a similar style that's just a single step that can go on the inside or the outside of cups, again, and grab things. And then they also have these kind of post style ones that are good for grabbing onto small rings or possibly more round objects like wooden eggs and ornaments and such. And so you can just adjust the chuck with the thumb screw. There's no tools required, which is great. Just kind of have it grab the object. They do have an end stop on the other side if you need to have some center support on something thin as well. Overall, this is my favorite style of chuck rotary. A really favorite style of rotary is the chuck style. And the way they've implemented this with kind of the angled end, I just really appreciate this one. It works very well. So we'll be running a few tests in here with this laser to see how it works. But like I mentioned, if you want to find out more about this whole style of rotary, the R1, I do have a full video that you can watch as well. So the important question is, how does it actually perform? Well, with any of the laser tests I do some material tests with it to see what it'll do. And one of the things I always start out with is 1/8 inch Baltic birch plywood. This is something that I have sourced over the years from some hardwood dealers. So this isn't something you're going to find necessarily in your big box stores, but it is a quality plywood that is fairly consistent and gives me a good rating between lasers on how it works. So I went ahead and did a cut test. And as you can see here, we just barely cut through at the base performance of 100 millimeters a minute and 100% power. And there on the back side, you can see it wasn't necessarily getting through on too many of these. And so I'm not necessarily surprised about this. This is kind of a harder plywood between the pure layers of Baltic birch and then the type of glues they use. It's not as easy to cut as most craft plywoods, but it is fairly consistent. And so the handicap of this not having an air assist, I think, is the issue here, in that it just barely cut through at 100 millimeters a minute. So that's not to say this is a bad laser. I think if you added on the air assist, we definitely gain a little bit of speed and definitely some quality of the cut. As you see, we have that overburning on the outside of most of the squares. That would somewhat disappear. It would be cleaner on the backside, and I think we'd have more efficient cutting. But like I said, this is a harder plywood than your typical 1/8 inch craft plywood, so it's not necessarily the end all be all for this, but it gives me a good baseline. So they also provided some of these little cards in the sample pack, and so I ran one of these. This is more of a 1/16 inch plywood and definitely has a better cutting capability. So on this one, you can see as we got into the 150 millimeters a minute, 100% power, we were still getting through. Definitely at 125, we were even able to back it off to about 80% power. And you see on the back side, it's not terrible. Some of those others would probably push through, but If they tap out and fall out easily, I count them, but if they're kind of holding on and on their own, I don't push them through necessarily. But like I mentioned, some of these would probably fall through. Like here, if I just kind of push on this, there we go. We dropped out that 90% at the 150. So this can cut through materials, but I wouldn't expect it to cut through a lot of thicker materials. Even some 1/8 inch materials might be a bit of a struggle for it. You're going to need to do multiple passes, and without that air assist, you're going to end up with a bit of this kind of smoky overburn on both the front and the back side. So it's just something to be aware with one of these that, like I say, if you do get this one, you would definitely want to look into that air assist option. Now, with that lower cutting capability, I did want to try something more realistic. So I have some 1/16 inch basswood. Now, this is definitely a little more flexible, so you are going to sacrifice some durability with this, but it is a solid wood. There's no glues or whatnot. And so here where you can see is that it's working much better. We're getting through at 90% power, 100% power at the 250 millimeters a minute. And even so, I think we would almost be able to push out that last one. You see at the top there, it's just hanging on by a couple of fibers of wood there. So definitely, if you're really just looking at some lighter weight materials like this, this is just solid wood, 1/16 inch basswood. It's cutting through fairly cleanly. There's not even necessarily a lot of extra overburn because when it is efficient at cutting through, it doesn't have that lingering debris hanging out and staining your wood. So it definitely can cut some materials like this. Lighter weight craft plywoods definitely would stay an 1/8 inch or under. You're going to have some success on cutting. So with that, I wanted to jump into the engraving. Now this one, I checked the machine values. The controller was topped out at 6,000 millimeters a minute, so I left it at that, and I ran 2 tests. I ran one that was from 500 up to 3,500 millimeters a minute, and then from 3,500 to 6,000. And so the top one is our 500 to 3,500, and you can see on the bottom there, we're definitely getting a lot of extra burning. As a matter of fact, I was kind of risking almost starting a fire there, so I definitely wouldn't run it that slow at that high of power. But then as we get up, you see on the 10 and 20% power, they're starting to drop off on effectiveness. And then we jump down to the 3,500 up to 6,000. It's actually getting into 30, 40% before it's really even leaving a mark because it's moving a little bit faster and just not having that power. So again, this is something that's going to change from material to material. Some will actually have more of effect at lighter powers than not. This is just kind of your typical 1/4 inch plywood. This isn't quite Baltic birch, but it's more of a light ply. And so based off of this, if I'm, what you're looking for here is either kind of the depth and the tone of the image, if you're doing a solid engraving in vectorization, or if you're doing a raster, you're kind of looking for that range. And so if I'm doing a raster image, I'm going to probably stick to that 3,000 to 3,500. So that'd be kind of the top 2 bars on this one, where we're still kind of getting just a little bit of a faint engraving there at 15 to 20%. And then we're not getting too dark, but we're getting a decent range all the way up to that 100% power. And so that's kind of how I rate these. Now, there are other tests that do more of a gradient that if you're really trying to dial in for photos, it would be good to run with this. But this kind of got me in the ballpark for this laser. So having those engraving settings, I went ahead and tried a couple of photos. And the first one was kind of this AI photo of a ship on a storm at sea. And it lost a little bit of there's a lot of great detail, but the power was just too high for this wood. It was slightly different than the wood that I started out with. But hopefully you can kind of see the details in there if I get close enough are there. And that is one of the benefits to these lower power lasers is they are going to have a smaller focus point. So you're going to be able to add some detail to it. You get into that 0.08 by 0.08 usually with these 10 watt diodes. And if you get down to the 5 watt, you often get those down to 0.6 or 0.06 millimeter squared spot size. And so the advantage there is that that's going to increase your possible resolution with your photos. So like I say, this one was just a little too dark, but we're seeing some detail there. So I went ahead and grabbed just one of the photos that I have. And now this is an older photo. This is a husky dog that I had for a number of years. And this is in fall time. He was playing in some leaves. And hopefully you can see that we're getting some pretty decent detail in there. You can see the detail in the eyes and the fur. And so this was, again, it was run at that 3,500 millimeters a minute, and I think I topped it out at about 90% power on this one. So obviously it was an older photo, and so I didn't quite have the base resolution to work with, and spending maybe a little bit more time on that is definitely going to increase this. And also the medium, whenever you have this is Baltic birch 1/8" plywood, and whenever you have that grain in there, that's going to affect the quality of the image as well. So then I also wanted to combine some engraving with some cutting, and so I took another one of those small 16" cards, and I went ahead and cut out these little kitty cat keychain charm type things out of wood, and basically just an inverse of each other, but they are engraved and cut, and they came out pretty well. As you can see, there's a pretty consistent burn on both of them, and then again, it was able to cut through that thin plywood and leave just a nice caramelized burn. But again, for smaller items like this laser is going to do fine. It's definitely going to be just a little bit slower than yours, but as you get into some of those fine details on some of these things, or if you were trying to engrave acrylic or aluminum, it's going to show a higher quality in that. So speaking of acrylic and aluminum, I figured I'd test those mediums as well. And so I ran a speed power test on this, and we went ahead and went at 4,000 up to 6,000 millimeters a minute, and from 30 to 70% power. And for the most part, it really just kind of blanked them out. There's some slight variations in them, and if I kind of get that in the light, you'll kind of see that they're pretty clean throughout it. So obviously with these painted aluminum cards, you can kind of play around with your lines per inch and your power and your speeds to really kind of get the least amount of power you need, as well as the fastest speed, and still get a clean card. But just again, to kind of demonstrate the quality, I went ahead and I burned the Star Wars Stormtrooper selfie photo. I've used in a number of them. The nice thing about this is it does have a variety of detail in here that we can show. And the only laser I've seen do a better quality job than this has been the fine point IR laser. And it obviously took a lot longer than this though. This one ran really well and gave me a very good detail, and that's where you're getting that fine point focus on there, is making a huge difference. So now they do claim that this laser can cut acrylic, and they do include a few pieces in there. And so I did play around with this small piece of acrylic, and there are a few markings on there. Hopefully you can kind of see them, that it does do the engraving okay, but it took me quite a few tests to get through the acrylic itself. I actually ended up having to bump it down to 100 millimeters a minute, 100% power, and I had to do 3 passes. And then when I did that, I was able to just kind of snap it out, because that last little bit was just holding on a tiny bit. So it can, and this is just under 3 millimeter acrylic, it can cut through it. It's fairly clean. It does a nice job of an engraving, but again, it's not going to be fast, and I wouldn't want to be doing anything too terribly thick. So the real treat with this laser is that R1 Rotary, so we definitely hooked that up to run some tests. Now they do include the risers that bolt onto the feet on the frame of the laser, and so that's nice to get it elevated. That's going to give you a decent distance to be able to use most objects that you might put into the chuck. I think if you get into a 30-inch tumbler, you may have to boost that up a little bit more, but it doesn't have to be anything fancy. If you got some pieces of plywood or even some soup cans, they just need to be equal distance that you can set the laser on and be somewhat stable. It'll work pretty well. I went ahead and started with a dowel. This is about 1.25 inches or 1 inch dowel, just to run some basic tests on there. Ran kind of the initial test to just make sure that it's rotating 360 degrees. Once you have that, if you wanted to, you could draw some like 1-inch square boxes on there and measure them out. But once we had that, I went ahead and just kind of set up a sample little file and just some text on there to show it working. This is a test of the R1 Rotary engraving text around a dowel. And that went a little over halfway around this dowel, and everything looks pretty good. Again, you want to double check that you're in alignment and get your focus set right. But once you kind of have that tested, you can start working around with other objects. So I had these little small glasses. They're kind of like shot glasses. These actually came with some desserts in them at my wife and my kids like, And so they made perfect practice material. And I went ahead and tried two different things. Now, this is Brilliance marking spray. This is meant to be used with really CO2 lasers and such, but it can work well with these diodes as long as you get the power right. And so this just sprays on like a spray paint, and you let it dry, and then you set it up on your rotary or whatever, and as the laser hits it, it does mark it. Now on metal, stainless steel and such, it will turn black. And in some cases, if you use the right power settings on glass, it will also fuse this and turn black. But in this case, if we set the power right, it'll just give it that frosted look. The other option I went for is just, this is some black primer. And this, again, you want to clean your surface, spray this on in some light coats just so that it has a nice even opaque coating. And then when the laser hits this, again, it interacts with that and causes the glass to kind of fracture and crystallize. So it has a very similar effect to frosting it. And so ran that through on each one. Actually had to do a couple different tests because my first ones I ran a little light, but then I did end up coming up with just these little markings on here, and just a kind of a Star Wars Rebel and Imperial mix that says choose wisely. So anyone that has been following my channel for a while knows I do have a bit of a science fiction flair to me and like to integrate that into some of my test projects. And so both worked out pretty well. They came out very similar. I think I actually think that the black primer spray paint worked just a little better. The engraving, I think, was a little bit smoother. The only thing I don't like about it is the Brilliance marking spray cleans up with just pure water, whereas the spray paint, you have to use something like paint thinner or mineral spirits to clean it off. And I just like to not have to use chemicals and put on gloves and have it be possibly, have something on here that isn't, especially if it's food quality. I wouldn't want to use anything toxic per se, but you clean these up pretty well and hopefully just use them for decorations. But those are two options, and they worked all right. I think but if I had a little more time and material, I would definitely do a test grid, because I think you could definitely dial this in, maybe get it a little more brilliant white, or even with that Brilliance marking spray, you could probably get a black marking. And then just to show off how that Brilliance marking spray works on stainless steel, had this stainless steel cup here and sprayed that down with a coat of the spray, set my speed to about 1,000 millimeters a minute, 100% power, let it run, and it came out very, very crisp, very dark, very high quality. Now, I should have adjusted this. You see that it is a little squished, and this is something you'll get on round objects, especially tapered ones, where you need to kind of adjust your base photo a little out of round for that to compensate for it. But as far as just a quick test on our speeds, feeds, and the quality, and that yes, a 10-watt diode laser will make this Brilliance marking spray fuse and be nice and dark. That was the whole point of this test. So that was the extent of the testing I did with this one right now. Like I say, I think if it had an air assist in it, I would have been able to do a little more cutting with some other materials. As it was, I was really kind of limited to that 16th plywood or the pure basswood. And that's going to be great for someone who doesn't need to do a lot. I think this type of laser really geared at the person who is mainly focused on engraving. Between flat material as well as having that rotary option, it's going to do a pretty good job at engraving, plus that 10 watt with that smaller focus spot is going to give you some higher quality. Is this a good deal? That's going to be up to what you need to do. If you're needing to do some cutting, there's definitely some other machines that have air assist and a little higher power that are probably going to be a better deal. Atomstack themselves has a really nice deal on their X20 laser. It's not terribly expensive, has a few more features, has a nice air pump with it. And it's going to get you a lot more options in the cutting, in the same frame and such. You could add on this R1 Rotary, and you have a really good combo there. But if you're just looking at engraving, want to kind of limit your expenses, this might be something you want to look at. It's not too expensive, and I think at the time right now, they've got a pretty good coupon at Amazon that brings it down below $600. So definitely something to consider if you're budget-minded, want to have the option of a really quality rotary, and want to kind of get into it without a huge expense. All right, so I think that's where I'm going to leave this video. I hope that you found it informative. And if you have any questions about this laser or anything else you saw in my workshop, go ahead and leave a comment down below. I try to get back to those as quickly as I can. If you are interested in this laser, I'll have links to it and other things as well. Some of those are affiliate links. They do give a little kickback to me at no extra cost to you, so appreciate you using them, but as always, no pressure. If you're really interested in lasers, definitely stick around, check out some of the other videos on my channel. I try to offer some tutorials, some tips and tricks, some project videos, and then things like this where it's a review video. As well as on Sunday evenings, my friend David from the Clack Shack and I, we hop online for a couple hours and we talk about what's going on in our workshop, talk about new products, and most of all, we like to take questions from the live audience, try to help people out with things they're wondering about, maybe issues they're having with their equipment. It's just a good time to hang out with us, get to know us a little bit better, and ask some questions in real time. So those are Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Central Time. Again, I have a link down to that below as well. So once again, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and most importantly, I hope you can get out into your workshop and make something too. We'll catch you next time.